Washington Journal continues.
And joining us now is Eleanor Clift, the Washington correspondent for the Daily Beast. She's here to talk about the president's first day in office, his policy decisions so far, including and what to look for in the weeks ahead, including a nomination for the U.S. Supreme Court. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be with you, Kimberly.
So let's start off with the topic we were discussing during the last segment, the Twitter war between Presidents Trump and Peña Nieto. What sort of tone do you think that sets in terms of one of the president's first diplomatic acts?
I wouldn't call it a diplomatic act, for starters. This is the president really picking a fight with one of our closest neighbors. And you have to really look at the facts behind this, and it's really his pledge to build a wall and to have Mexico pay for it. And so now he's squabbling with his own party about how to get Mexico to pay for it, and they're floating various taxes, which, of course, would be passed on to the American consumer, number one, and two, would likely hurt the economy in Mexico, which would have the end result of perhaps increasing migration from Mexico, which is at an all-time low. It's at a 4-year low. So I think the president seems to react impulsively to a lot of things, and then people in the White House and the people on the Hill and the journalists, we all come scrambling up to try to, figure out what this means. And so I think this is not a good start to a president who really does want to change the way America does business with other countries, but by basically canceling a visit and angering the leader of the other country. I don't think that's a fortuitous way to begin a relationship.
Now, the president has been busy. He signed a series of executive orders in a number of areas, from immigration to Obamacare. Talk a little bit about that, and is he living up to his campaign promises in that way?
Well, he seems to feel compelled to put down markers in every one of these areas where he made campaign promises. I think he's very sensitive to the way he's been covered and reported on, and I think there has been an element in the news coverage that says, well, these were campaign slogans, he's not going to be able to deliver on them, maybe we shouldn't take him that seriously. In fact, some advocates of the president say, take him seriously but don't take him literally. And so he has spent his first 5 or 6 days in office, signaling that, yes, he really means it. He means it on trade. He means it on Obamacare. He means it on immigration. And every one of his pronouncements has ripple effects through the affected communities. And so he's sparked demonstrations against him certainly on the immigration orders. And he really has sent his own supporters scrambling to figure out how to implement what he then says he wants done. The wall in particular, which I've done some reporting about, it's a very long border. It's almost 2,000 miles. There is fencing along a great deal of it. Some of the terrain is impassable. You really couldn't build anything there. And the appropriation that the president is asking for is between $12 and $15 billion to build this part wall in places at a time when immigration across the border from Mexico is, as I said earlier, it's at a 40-year low, and people are coming from the Central American countries through Mexico, and they are walking up to the border officials and turning themselves in. You really don't need a wall. The immigration picture has changed, and President Trump is responding to the way immigration was, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So you would hope that the facts would catch up before we spend a lot of money and create a lot of difficulties. And the hypocrisy of the Republican Congress is also extraordinary. They never wanted to spend money on anything when President Obama was in office. And every penny that was spent had to be offset with another cut. And now they're blithely talking about coming up with $12 to $15 billion for this without blinking an eye.
House Speaker Paul Ryan, former Ways and Means Chairman, known to be very fiscally conservative, said he was on board with this.
Yes. So I don't know how they pull that off, along with the tax cuts that the new president has promised.
Okay, we are talking with Eleanor Clift of the Daily Beast about President Donald Trump's week in office so far and what he might accomplish in the future. Democrats can call 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, and independents can call 202-748-8002. Now, jumping off a little bit on that discussion about the reaction from House Speaker Paul Ryan and also Leader Mitch McConnell. They have the majority in the Congress and the White House. How much, if any resistance might the president face from his own party? So far, it doesn't seem like there's very much, but they differ on a lot of issues.
They do, and when they get down to actually crafting legislation, and again, coming up with the dollars, and then the Congressional Budget Office then costs everything out, and we will see in big bold letters how this inflates the deficit. So I think there are going to be political fights ahead, particularly over Obamacare. And the president approaches this like the CEO he was for most of his life. It all seems kind of easy. You replace it and you do it and you make it better. And it's a lot more difficult in government, where you have checks and balances, where you have many competing different groups. With Obamacare, you have hospitals for the first time have been getting reimbursed for the emergency care that they provide. You have 20 million people who have health insurance who didn't have it before. So it would be very disruptive to repeal Obamacare without having a serious plan to put in place. And anyone who's at all looked at the way health care works in this country, because the insurance companies are at the center of it, it's really a balancing act, and you have to come up with revenue somewhere. And if you don't like taxes and you don't like a mandate on people who are healthy to buy health insurance so that when they're sick, they will be covered, there aren't a lot of ways to get to the outcome you want. And so I think the Democrats, on one hand, are kind of enjoying watching the Republicans squirm over this. But in the end, there are real lives, real people out there who are very nervous about the prospect of potentially losing health coverage.
Okay, we have Gwendolyn calling in from Lansing, Illinois, in our Democratic line. Mm-hmm. Gwendolyn, you are on with Eleanor Clift. Gwendolyn, are you there? Okay, I think we lost Gwendolyn. We're going to move on to John. John's calling in from Severna Park, Maryland, on our Republican line. Good morning, John.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
I'm just calling in to comment on some of the things these other callers have said. I think when people tell the public that is supposed to be supporting our president that Donald Trump is Hitler-like, I think that detracts greatly from the cause that most of this nation has stood beside. And I just really think it's wrong. As far as the executive actions, most of these executive actions that he's signing in are to undo unlawful executive actions that have already been put in place by our last president.
Okay. Or you want to respond?
Well, first of all, I would agree that Hitler analogies are never good. And it reminds me, President Obama in his final press conference said, people are saying, oh, this is the end of the world. He said, nothing is the end of the world until the end of the world. So I think you do have to use your metaphors carefully and appropriately. Executive actions, the president's executive actions were lawful. They weren't challenged in court. They weren't overturned. A president does have a pretty broad range of authority with these executive actions, and I think President Trump is now doing the same, and his actions will be tested in the court of public opinion as well.
And as we speak, there are people lining up for today's March for Life, of a pro-life demonstration that's taking place here in Washington today. USA Today reports that Vice President Pence will be speaking at that event. It says Vice President Pence will become the highest-ranking government official to speak in person at an annual anti-abortion march in Washington on Friday, the New York Times has reported. Pence, who was an early congressional leader of efforts to defund Planned Parenthood, was a regular speaker at the March for Life during his 12 years that he served in the Congress. Talk about the issue of abortion in this administration. Is this a time that Republicans can gain more traction on this issue? Is the likelihood that Planned Parenthood, for example, will be defunded real?
I think there are going to be greater numbers for this year's march, perhaps than in recent marches, because I do think the opponents of abortion rights do feel emboldened by this administration. As you point out, Vice President Pence was in the forefront of efforts to defund Planned Parenthood. He signed as governor a number of bills that restrict access to abortion in his home state of Indiana. And one of the orders I believe that President Trump signed was to reinstate the ban, the global ban on giving American aid to groups not only that perform abortions, but that even counsel, that even mention the possibility of abortion in their counseling, and that it's been dubbed the Mexico City ban because it originated at a meeting in Mexico City when President Reagan was in the office. And Republicans always reinstate it, and Democrats lift the ban. And so I think the division between the two parties is quite evident on the issue of abortion rights, and it will play a big role when the president names his nominee to fill the vacant Supreme Court seat. And generally, senators are wary about getting a nominee to commit one way or the other that they support Roe v. Wade, and the nominee usually skirts around that. But I think both sides are going to be very direct on that issue in the questioning of the new nominee, because that goes to one of candidate Trump's specific pledges that he would name pro-life judges to the court.
Okay, and in a programming note, we will be carrying coverage of the March for Life rally here on C-SPAN at noon. You can see that also on cspan.org, as well as on C-SPAN Radio through our C-SPAN Radio app. Al's calling from Buffalo, New York on our independent line. Good morning, Al.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm glad to be a part of this here. I'm only going to speak from a military point of sense because I've been there for 25 years. I'm a ground troop. And the things that Trump is doing, he's coming out with a hatchet. And he's the only one that's swinging it. But the people that he's swinging it at are the ones that are trying to back him up. But my thing is the wall don't really need that there because China had it, Germany had it, you know what I mean? And it didn't work. It came down. And my other thing is abortion. What if this person is raped? Does they get, you know what I mean, this thing? And then as far as this Obamacare thing, you're talking $30 million from the day he rebukes it.
Okay, let's let Eleanor Clift respond.
Yeah, I think the caller makes some very good points here. And he did identify himself as former military. And I would add, we haven't even gotten to the president flirting with the idea of reinstating torture and saying that he's talked to some very smart people, and he, of course, is smart himself, and they say it works, and he believes it works. And then he kind of flips and says, well, General Mattis, who is the new defense secretary, who, when he was being interviewed initially for the job of being defense secretary, and then President-elect Trump asked him about torture, and General Mattis said it doesn't work, and the president-elect adopted that position. Now he's flipped back and said, but yes, he'll follow General Mattis. This back and forth and this assertion that, yes, he believes in torture and, yes, it works, really unsettles leaders around the world, particularly the new Prime Minister from the UK, who was with the president yesterday addressing the Republican retreat and who he will be meeting with today. So I think many people look at General Mattis, who was confirmed with 98 votes. It was only a single vote against him, and that was New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, because he hadn't spent the requisite 7 years out of the military. There is a great deal of confidence being put in General Mattis to restrain President Trump on some of the kind of top-of-the-head judgments that he tends to make.
Senator Gillibrand is one senator who has opposed all of the president-elect's cabinet picks so far, but they appear to have no obstacles to confirmation. What about that? How the Democrats are responding, and even some Republicans, Marco Rubio expressed some concerns about Rex Tillerson before ultimately voting for him. What do you think about the reaction from Congress, particularly from Democrats, about President Trump's cabinet picks?
Well, Democrats don't have any power. The only power they have is to kind of shine a light on these nominees and some of their ethics problems or some of the conflicts they have in terms of the agencies they're going to head or their conflicts with President Trump, but they don't have the votes. There are 52 Republicans and 48 Democrats, including the two who are independent but caucus with the Democrats. And in 2013, I think it was, that the Democratic leader changed the rules with the consent of the Democrats, that they gave up the right to filibuster executive appointments and lower court judges. And they did that because they couldn't get anybody confirmed for the Obama administration. And they did get some important judicial seats filled. But the consequences of that are that every one of these nominees, if the Republicans stick together, every one of them will be confirmed. And you have President Trump grumbling that it's taking so long. Again, he's responding like the CEO. You know, if you're the CEO of a big global corporation or enterprise that he was and still is, you're used to kind of snapping your finger and everybody gets things done. And so it's very frustrating to him that Democrats are using what little power they have to slow down some of these nominations by a matter of days.
We are talking with Eleanor Clift, the Washington correspondent from the Daily Beast, who has also covered every presidential campaign since 1976, was formerly a White House correspondent for the Los Angeles Times as well. Jerry's on the line from Eflin, North Carolina, on our Democratic line. Hi, Jerry.
How you doing? Here about last week, all I've been hearing about is how they've been trying to delegitimize Donald Trump. And, about 18 months ago, Donald Trump started to delegitimize the world. He has talked about the Pope, the CIA, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Meryl Streep, governors, foreign leaders. Everybody was not, they said anything, he put them down. They want good. They want to, and then they get up there and they start crying about delegitimizing him because his crowd wasn't as big as somebody else's crowd. Thin skin, come on, mister. Right. And this wall, they're going to probably start trying to build it. And they'll build some, it'll look about like something like the Alamo now. It'll be a part of one of the, it'll be a thing in our history, like Stagville out here in northern Durham County. It's an old slave plantation, but we keep it as a dark spot in our history, and we have a Pearl Harbor, or we have things that we have done that a Wounded Knee. They have a thing up there about us You know, that's the largest mass shooting in the history of America. A bunch of white European Christian immigrants or sons of immigrants come over here under direction of the God-fearing white guy and kill all the Indians.
All right,
in the
Jerry,
name of the Lord.
let's let Eleanor Clift
Right, there was some
respond.
very appropriate historical analogies that he cited, and if you project 50 years into the future, if there is part of this wall built, it could be kind of a monument to an attitude that we will not be proud of at the time.
Let's talk a little bit more about Democrats and how they are reacting, or how they might react to to President Trump's presidency. In Politico, there's a piece that talks about a potential scorched earth strategy by the Democrats. It says what began as a high-minded discussion about how to position the Democratic Party against President Donald Trump appears to be nearing its conclusion. The bulk of the party has settled on a scorched earth, not now, not ever model of opposition. It goes on to say they were entitled to a grace period, but it was midnight the night of the inauguration to 8 o'clock in the morning when the administration sent out people to lie about numerous significant things, and the damage to the credibility of the presidency has already been profound, said Washington Governor Jay Inslee. They were entitled to a grace period and they blew it. What do you think about this? Do you expect to see a scorched earth approach from Democrats?
I think they're going to be very oppositional when it comes to repealing Obamacare without a replacement, or really looking at whatever replacement and who it impacts. I think they will be very oppositional on the immigration proposals that he is putting out. I mean, the president so far has not touched DACA, which is the executive order that President Obama signed that allowed children brought here by their parents and basically grown up as Americans to allow them to be free of prosecution, at least for the immediate future. He hasn't gone near that. But I think there will be some reasons for Democrats to cooperate. First of all, there's a political reason. You have 10 Democrats who are up in 2018 senators in states that Donald Trump won. So I'm not sure that a reflexive opposition to everything he suggests is going to play for them at home. And there is great hope still on the Democratic side that that candidate Trump's pronouncements about a big infrastructure bill would be something that Democrats would go along with. President Obama tried to get money for infrastructure the whole time he was in office, and the Republicans didn't want to spend the money. It's now uncertain, though, whether what President Trump means is money for infrastructure for public projects, or simply tax breaks for big developers to be building projects of their own choosing. So that has to be decided. But I think Democrats want government to work, and I think there will be times when they will work with Mr. Trump.
Okay, Liam's calling in from Leesville, Louisiana.
There will be times when they will work with Mr. Trump.
Okay, Liam's calling in from Leesville, Louisiana, on our Republican line. Hi, Liam.
Morning.
Morning.
This is retired Command Sergeant Major William H. Hood, United States Army. I'd like to speak to my lady, Eleanor, please,
All righty.
ma'am. Can I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
My lady, Eleanor. I'm 82 years old. I've watched you many, many years, my lady.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, you dug for the truth. And this morning, ma'am, why don't you tell the truth about that 20 million people that's on Medicaid that you all keep talking about? The taxpayers are the one that's making sure that they have that health care. And it will continue California and New York and Chicago, and the investigation will prove that, and you know it.
Okay, let's give Eleanor a chance to respond.
Right. Well, first of all, I report the truth as I understand it from the people I talk to and the research that I do, and I think everyone across the political divide understands how disruptive it would be if you took away Obamacare, and I think a lot of Republicans are very nervous about that as well.
Okay, and speaking of the plan to replace Obamacare, The Hill points out that there are some competing plans that Republicans are mulling, and they highlight a GOP divide. It says a GOP bill introduced by Senators Bill Cassidy of Louisiana and Susan Collins of Maine seeks a middle ground to replace Obamacare, but invited harsh opposition from both sides. Despite a plea for bipartisanship, Democrats have blasted the legislation. Senator Rand Paul this week introduced the only other Senate proposal with legislative language, simply called the Obamacare Replacement Act, after calling the Cassidy plan not conservative enough. Senator Cassidy had said that it's really difficult to keep the coverage for pre-existing conditions and other things without a mandate. What might we come out? What might the Republicans come out with, and how might it be received?
Yeah, the whole point of getting everybody into an insurance pool is that everybody pays. The healthy pay as well as the sick. If you only have an insurance pool of sick people, then it will be very costly, and the insurance companies are not going to want to pay for it. And healthy people do face the risk that they will get old and sick someday. So it makes a certain amount of sense. And it's very difficult to take away that mandate and still provide coverage. The Susan Collins Cassidy bill would allow states where Obamacare is working allow those states to keep it. And there are a number of those states where that is true. And I believe they include Indiana, Mr. Pence's home state, Kentucky, Ohio, as well as a number of very blue states. California, Obamacare is hugely popular, and they have many, many enrollees. So, but Republicans recoil against that because it goes against their basic premise that Obamacare is a mess and it's a failure and all that. And so they have a political problem there. But I think Susan Collins is onto something, as she often is within her party, and that is to give the states more flexibility. And if they don't like Obamacare, let them design the kind of plan they want, with the understanding, though, that they have to have some sort of a mandate, or else how do you pay for it?
Okay, Daryl's calling in from Greenville, North Carolina on our independent line. Daryl, you're on with Eleanor Clift.
Yes, I want to make a couple of comments. One thing about the wall, who's going to pay for it and what have you. The money that we're millions and millions and millions we're going to save in cutting off funding to all these sanctuary cities like Los Angeles and Chicago and New York, that money will pay for a good big portion of getting the wall built, because we won't have to be paying them money if they're not going to, abide by the law as far as illegal immigrants, especially ones that are criminal. And on the Obamacare, I just want to say, I think that plan shot itself in the foot when they allowed children or young adults up to age 25 to stay on their parents' plan. What has hurt Obamacare the most is the older, unhealthy people. There's too much risk with them, and the young people are staying on their parents' insurance too long. If they're still in college or a student, they should be able to stay on their parents' insurance as long as they're in school. But if they're not, when they get 18 and grown and get out on their own, they should have to buy Obamacare plans too. When you take, your young healthy pool and add it into the older high-risk people, then that spreads out the risk and should make the cost more affordable for everybody. But if you take all the young people and leave them on the parents' plan, then you're taking all the young healthy people and taking them out the risk pool.
Okay.
And that's all I have to say.
I think if the caller had some people who are familiar with all of these aspects of insurance coverage and payments, it would be clear to him that those numbers simply don't add up. First of all, if you tried to take away the provision of young people staying on their parents' plan until 26, you'd probably get a pretty big revolt in this country. That's one of the most popular provisions. And secondly, it talks about the older pool. At age 65 in this country, you can get onto Medicare, which is one of the most popular programs among seniors ever. So. And that is, quote, government run. They aren't government doctors, but the government does pay for people's coverage. And so, and the notion that you could withhold some grant money to big cities, sanctuary cities, money that generally goes to their police departments and so forth, and somehow that would come up with the money to pay the wall, that wouldn't work either. So anyway, it's the kind of mythology that's out there and doesn't really hold up under scrutiny.
We are talking with Eleanor Clift, the Washington correspondent for the Daily Beast. And our callers can join our conversation. Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. Now, you mentioned the Supreme Court pick that's coming up today in the Washington Times. It points out that the DNC is divided on whether to block Donald Trump's Supreme Court pick. It says Representative Keith Ellison, the frontrunner in the race for chairman of the DNC, has been strikingly silent on whether his party should flex the filibuster to block GOP Supreme Court, a GOP Supreme Court nominee, giving his competitors an opening to draw distinctions. The issue surfaced this week after former Labor Secretary Tom Perez, widely considered Mr. Ellison's top rival for the DNC post, said Republicans did everything to gum up President Obama's agenda, so Democrats should return the favor by filibustering President Trump's upcoming high court pick. Do you expect a filibuster when President Trump announces his pick next week, or might the Democrats wait and see who is chosen?
There's actually never been a full-blown filibuster for a Supreme Court nominee, although the threat has always been there. And I think the Democrats feel that they have some cards to play because the Republicans did something that was unprecedented, which was refuse to consider President Obama's pick for a vacant Supreme Court seat for almost a year. Justice Scalia died in February of 2016, and they sat on Merrick Garland's nomination, refused to give him a hearing or a vote. I think if you look at the list of names that have been floated by the Trump White House, there are some on that list that would be very easy for the Democrats to oppose, and I think also to mount a filibuster. If Mr. Trump does come up with someone who is, broadly conservative, but within what we would consider a range of views that is not so extreme, I think then the Democrats would consider him. This is the Scalia seat, so filling this seat would not change the ideological makeup of the court. This president is likely to get one or two more if other sitting justices decide to step down, and the older justices tend to be on the liberal side. So there's an argument to be made for letting President have his choice, as long as it's not one of the more extreme choices this first time out, and really holding his feet to the fire the next one. Democrats are wargaming this out very carefully because these are lifetime appointments, and the people being considered are probably in their 40s, early 50s, and they could be on the court for 30 years.
Politico reports that President Trump backs a nuclear option if the Democrats do try to block the Supreme Court nominee. It says President Trump and some Senate Republicans are now openly threatening to kill the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees. How likely is that to happen?
I think that's also possible because, and what that means is that you would take away the last tool that the minority has to filibuster a Supreme Court judge. But if the Republicans do that, at some point there will be another Democrat in the White House, and that could come back to bite the Republicans. And you do have some institutionalists, including the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, who might not be eager to do that.
All right, Steve's calling in from Lorain, Ohio on our Democratic line. Hi, Steve.
Hi. Good morning, Eleanor.
Good morning.
I'm a very rabid admirer of your liberal stance on the McNeil-Lear report that I'm actually miss very much. I have one statement and a question I wanted to ask you. Mm-hmm. I really believe that the American people, if they had half a brain, would still be half-wits. This 20% tariff that they are going to put on Mexican imports. What do they think the largest import from Mexico is? Piñatas? It's crude oil. And I think 20% import tax on that would spike the gasoline cost to over $3 a gallon. And if President Pena really gets irritated with Trump's fiascos, I think he may just put all that oil on a tanker and send it to China. What do you think we'd be paying for gas then?
Right. I think you make some excellent points there. I think, President Trump approaches this as though he's got all the cards and he's the dominant player. But, Mexico has some leverage over us, and you point out a very big one, and that is gas prices. And you have gas prices go up, and see how quick the American people respond to that one.
USA Today reports on its front page today about some other effects of a potential tariff on Mexican imports and how that can cost Americans. It says American consumers may have to pay more for products ranging from Toyotas to vegetables to beer if a proposal floated by President Trump to impose a 20% tariff on Mexican imports goes into effect. William Gale, co-director of the Tax Policy Center, says that while a stronger dollar could minimize the pain U.S. shoppers feel, the irony of putting a tariff on Mexican goods is that, to the extent that it raises consumer prices in the U.S., consumers will be paying for the wall, not Mexican producers.
Right. The taxes they floated would be very regressive. They would hit the middle-class consumer in his and her pocketbook, and they would end up, you're right, paying for a wall that, again, we do not need. The Mexican people, the economy there has been doing better. They're not coming across in the numbers that they were. And it's a whole other set of immigration challenges that we have. It's from Guatemala and Honduras and I forget the third one. There are three of those Central American countries, and El Salvador. And they're gang infested, and people are escaping from that, and they're coming up through Mexico, and they're the ones who are coming over the border. And you can't just return them quickly. You detain them, you give them court dates, and then they tend to melt into our society. And you have a backlog of immigration cases for 3 to 5 years. What we need is more immigration judges, not a wall. That's not going to keep people out. People are coming, they're presenting themselves at the border with their children, saying, we need help, please accept us. And so it's a very different immigration challenge that we face today than the one that Donald Trump is responding to. He's frozen in time. He's responding to a challenge that went away a decade ago.
Okay, Chris is on our Republican line calling from Kentucky. Chris, you're on with Eleanor Clift.
Hello, Miss Eleanor.
Hi.
I've been watching you for 20 years, and I know what you've said over that period of time, and I agree with the command sergeant major that called in earlier. You need to tell the truth. Everything you've written has been equatable with bovine droppings. I do not agree with anything you've ever said, anything you've ever wrote, and why you have a job is beyond me.
All right, let's let you can respond if you want that, but let's treat our guests respectfully, please.
Yeah. I suspect he doesn't agree with me. I don't agree with him. Bottom line, amen.
Okay. Politico talks about another recent promise by the president to investigate what he calls voter fraud. He keeps repeating the contention that up to 5 million illegal votes were cast, despite that being reputed by just about everyone. Politico reports that the White House said that President Trump would sign an executive action to begin an investigation into voter fraud on Friday or Saturday, postponing a move that had been expected Thursday. According to a poll report, White House spokesman Sean Spicer told reporters late Thursday afternoon that Trump returned a little late from the Republican leadership retreat in Philadelphia and, quote, got jammed up on some meetings that needed to occur. What do you think of this delay in calling for this investigation, or the calling for the investigation itself?
Well, we've had numerous investigations into voter fraud in this country, and they come up with like 0 or 2 or 3. And in the last election, I think there was one woman who tried to vote for Donald Trump twice. The president is citing examples of people who are registered in multiple states, which apparently is true of his own daughter and some of his campaign aides or his White House aides. If you're registered in more than one place, that doesn't mean you vote in more than one place, and we haven't seen any evidence of that. Okay, he says there are dead people on the rolls. Yes, the rolls don't get purged, but the dead people don't show up and vote. That is not voter fraud. So, the media then is always searching, is there what was the motivation behind this? And so the latest theory that's come up is this is now cover for an investigation that will give states a green light to further crack down on voter registration and the ability of American citizens to vote. The Republican Party has a very checkered history in this matter of trying to keep people away from the polls who they think are not going to vote for them. So I think this is dangerous business, and it also highlights this president's penchant to respond emotionally and instantaneously to something he sees on TV or some perceived insult. And now he's got all the tools of the presidency, and he can order an investigation and spend, millions of dollars of taxpayer money to go chasing this. We've seen too many of these baseless investigations, and I would put the Benghazi investigation into that category, and how much money that cost to come up with nothing.
President Trump talked about this investigation into voter fraud in an interview this week with ABC News. Let's take a look at a bit of that.
I said it, and I said it strongly, because what's going on with voter fraud is horrible. That's number one. Number two, I would have won the popular vote if I was campaigning for the popular vote. I would have gone to California, where I didn't go at all. I would have gone to New York, where I didn't campaign at all. I would have gone to a couple of places that I didn't go to, and I would have won that much easier than winning the Electoral College. But as you know, the Electoral College is all that matters. It doesn't make any difference. With that being said, if you look at voter registration, you look at the dead people that are registered to vote, who vote. You look at people that are registered in 2 states. You look at all of these different things that are happening with registration. You take a look at those registration, you're going to find, and we're going to do an investigation on it.
But 3 to 5 million illegal votes.
Well, we're going to find out, but it could very well be that much. You have people that are registered who are dead, who are illegals, who are in 2 states. You have people registered in 2 states. They're registered in New York and in New Jersey. They vote twice. There are millions of votes, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to do an investigation.
You're now president of the United States.
When you say, of course, and I want the voting process to be legitimate.
But now, what I'm asking, when you say, in your opinion, millions of illegal votes, That is something that is extremely fundamental to our functioning democracy, a fair and free election.
Sure.
You say you're going to launch an investigation into this.
Done.
What you have presented so far has been debunked. It's been called false.
Take a look at the Pew reports.
I called the author of the Pew report last night, and he told me that they found no evidence of voter fraud.
Really? Then why did he write the report?
He said no evidence of voter fraud.
Excuse me. Then why did he write the report?
So
according to Pew report, then he's groveling again. You know, I always talk about the reporters that grovel when they want to write something that you want to hear, but not necessarily millions of people want to hear or have to hear.
So you've launched an investigation.
We're going to launch an investigation to find out, and then the next time, and I will say this, of those votes cast, none of them come to me. None of them come to me. They would all be for the other side.
What's your reaction to that?
I think it will be debunked, and I just hope he doesn't spend too many more millions of American taxpayer dollars investigating a bogus claim.
Okay, Bob's calling in from Lawndale, California on our Democratic line. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, and hello, Eleanor. McLaughlin Group and throughout a whole lot of things. I've enjoyed the shows that you've been on and the forums you've been on.
Thanks very much.
One of the first things I did on last Monday when our great president came in is I called the White House hotline, you know, the comment line. Mm-hmm. They turned it off. I checked it just before I called in to your show, and the White House no longer has a comment line. You have to have an internet connection to talk to our president. That shows how much he's supporting the slave staters. He said they couldn't afford to fly to Washington to protest. Well, them poor people now can't use a telephone to comment to the president. They have to get an internet connection out there in the rural areas, which is kind of difficult. So he's going to have trouble getting comments from the people. The other side of the other statement I have to make is the Republicans treated our president as if he was the N-word. And I think we should fight back against Mr. Trump. He is trying to hurt our country. I heard a general call in. He's got his government pay that he lives on. We have a lot of our air bases and our war bases down in the South. It's an employment agency, and it's a way for them boys to get out of the South into the rest of America, where they can get some other jobs other than working on their farm or skinning chickens.
Okay, let's give Eleanor Clift a chance.
Well, he's telling me something I didn't know, that they suspended the comment line. I imagine this new president, his first week in office, has triggered so much outcry from so many different quarters of America that line would have been overwhelmed, and maybe that's the reason, but let's see. But they didn't discontinue a provision that the Obama administration started, and that is you could generate petitions online, and if you reached a certain number, I think 100,000 maybe, that you would then get a response, and that petition reached that number pretty easily, and it's for the new president to release his tax returns, which is something that Mr. Trump has said repeatedly the American people don't care about, but apparently collectively we do.
The president is going to the Pentagon today for a ceremonial swearing in for General Mattis as the defense secretary, and also to meet with officials there, the Joint Chiefs there, to discuss strategy. The New York Times reports that plan would be to strike ISIS harder. It says the White House is drafting a presidential directive that calls for Defense Secretary James Mattis to devise plans to more aggressively strike the Islamic State, which could include American artillery on the ground in Syria and Army attack helicopters to support an assault on the group's capital, Raqqa, officials say. How do you think this might be received in Congress, and what's the likelihood that we will see a policy shift?
I thought he was giving his generals 60 days or 90 days to draft a plan, and so it's
30 days. We demand that a new option be presented to him within 30 days.
Okay, well that's a pretty short timeline. Also, Mr. Putin is directing much of what is happening on the ground in Syria now. And I gather that the White House is saying that President Trump will be talking with President Putin, I think this weekend by phone. So I'd be interested to see whether this new strategy that they're coming up with is in accordance with what the Russians are doing on the ground there, or if this is an independent strategy. And this does sound like upping the presence, but no boots on the ground, which is always a red line that lawmakers have been unwilling to cross. He's promised that he can eradicate ISIS, so I do expect that he's got to come up with something. But I hope it's, if he doesn't think it through, I think people will be looking to the Defense Secretary, General Mattis, to think through whatever else the U.S. might do in that region and the possible consequences and blowback.
Okay, Angela is calling on our Republican line from Bradenton, Florida. Hi, Angela.
Hello. Good morning.
Morning.
Hello.
Go ahead. You're on with Eleanor Clift.
Yes. Well, first, the lady is talking with. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. She is very inaccurate in most of the things she's saying. I could go on and debunk what she's saying, but I have only one comment. Madam, retire. Go play bingo because you are offensive to the journalist. You are too biased. You don't see 1 inch of your nose. Please retire and play bingo.
Okay, let's maybe take this to
I take that as a badge of honor. Thank you.
Well, there is.
I'm not going anywhere.
But there is a divide. I mean, we've had Steve Bannon, the White House advisor, calling the members of the media the opposition. Talk a little bit about what it's like to be a journalist in this age where it seems that the media itself is a player, or at least a target of criticism.
This is not new. Go back to President Nixon and Spiro Agnew and my good friend Pat Buchanan and sparring partner. He wrote some of those speeches, and they call the press the nadering nabobs of negativism. And George Wallace, who was the segregationist governor of Alabama, who won a number of states in Democratic won a number of states in the Democratic primaries, and then won states in the general election, would do many of the same things that we see Donald Trump doing today. Pointing to the press and making fun of them, and really setting them up as the enemy. It's a tactic. And if Trump can steer the animosity about his policies, can he steer that towards the messengers and the mainstream media, that's a win for him. So, I mean, that's how I look upon it, and I don't think it doesn't change one bit the way we do our work.
All right, Chuck's calling in from Springfield, Pennsylvania, on our independent line. Hi, Chuck.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Go ahead. You're on with Eleanor Clift.
Yeah, I'm calling about a comment that was made about half an hour ago when one of the other callers said that President Obama had taken executive actions that were illegal. And Eleanor's response was that, no, that was not the case. There was nothing that had gone to the courts. Well, I'm a little surprised by that response because he was defeated 9-0 over the NLRB case at the Supreme Court level, and that included Supreme Court justices that he had appointed. So he was defeated there. He was also defeated with his universal amnesty plan in the Texas courts. So I'm wondering why she answered the way she did. In fact, there are 2 examples, but there are others as well.
There are many more examples that have been upheld, and the fact that it was defeated in the Texas courts, if it went further up the chain, he would probably prevail. I think the bottom line is the same, that an executive has executive authority, and President Obama used it, and President Trump is using it, and probably some of Mr. Trump's orders will be challenged in courts, but More importantly, they will be challenged in the court of public opinion, and I think a lot of what he's trying to do has already triggered a lot of opposition from the public.
All right, Eleanor Clift, Washington correspondent for the Daily Beast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Kimberly.
And up next, we will be taking your calls. Democrats can call 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002 with your thoughts. We'll be right back.